As the plane soared above the clouds, tension filled the cabin, not because of turbulence, but because of words sharper than any storm. A young woman, kind-hearted and calm, had taken her seat near a group of passengers whose disdainful glances and whispered remarks made it clear she didn't belong in their eyes. Their laughter stung, their comments cut deep, but she stayed silent, her composure masking the hurt within. She wasn't looking for a fight, she was just trying to get through the flight. But then the unthinkable happened. The air thickened, chaos erupted, and those same passengers found themselves in desperate need of help. In that critical moment, all eyes turned to her, the very person they had dismissed. What she did next left everyone speechless and redefined what it means to rise above hate. You won't believe how this flight ended. Stay tuned for the full story. The flight had started out like any other. Passengers boarded, found their seats, and settled in for the journey ahead. Among them was Amara, a nurse traveling home after a long, exhausting week. She kept to herself, quietly flipping through a book as the plane taxied down the runway. But even as she tried to disappear into the pages, the murmurs around her were impossible to ignore. A group seated a few rows behind her exchanged cruel jokes under their breath, their laughter loud enough to draw uneasy glances from other passengers. Amara didn't react. She'd dealt with this kind of treatment before, subtle, stinging, and deeply unfair. Still, their words weighed heavy. Why couldn't they just let her be? She focused on breathing, reminding herself that this flight was only a few hours long. But as the plane climbed higher into the sky, something far more serious began to unfold. The flight seemed to settle into a routine, but Amara couldn't shake the unease from the earlier comments. She tried to distract herself by looking out the window, watching the endless expanse of clouds. Across the aisle, a mother soothed a restless baby, while the flight attendant handed out drinks. Everything appeared calm on the surface, but just as Amara began to relax, a commotion erupted a few rows ahead. One of the passengers, an older man from the same group that had mocked her earlier, was gasping for air, clutching his chest. Panic spread like wildfire. His companions froze, their faces pale, unsure of what to do. A flight attendant rushed over, calling out for medical help. Amara hesitated for a moment, her heartbeat quickening. This was her chance to look the other way, to let someone else step up. But as the man's breathing grew more labored, she made her decision. Amara quickly unbuckled her seatbelt, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. "I'm a nurse," she said firmly, stepping into the aisle. The flight attendant looked relieved, guiding her toward the struggling passenger. The man's friends, the ones who had ridiculed her earlier, now stared at her with desperation and fear. But just as relief began to build that help would soon arrive, the plane shuddered violently. A wave of turbulence swept through, knocking a few passengers' belongings into the aisle. Amara braced herself, shielding the man with her body as his condition worsened. His breathing was faint now, his face pale, and Amara knew the clock was ticking. Kneeling beside him, Amara asked rapid questions, checking his pulse and observing his shallow breaths. It was clear he was having a medical emergency, possibly a heart attack. The plane wasn't equipped for something this serious, but Amara knew every second mattered. She called for the emergency kit and instructed the flight attendant to alert the pilot about the situation. As she worked, she could feel the weight of the group's eyes on her. Their silence was deafening, a stark contrast to their earlier mocking laughter. She focused on saving the man's life, but deep inside, the irony wasn't lost on her. As Amara worked to stabilize the man, she heard a sudden announcement from the cockpit. The captain's calm but urgent voice cut through the cabin. "We've declared a medical emergency and are preparing for an unscheduled landing." Gasps rippled through the passengers, the reality of the situation sinking in. Then, another layer of tension emerged. The emergency medical kit was missing crucial supplies. "We don't have a defibrillator," the flight attendant whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Amara's heart sank. Without it, his survival depended solely on her skill and luck. The cabin felt like it was holding its breath as Amara moved with precision, using what little she had to keep the man alive. She improvised, performing chest compressions while urging the flight attendant to keep an oxygen mask in place. Passengers whispered nervously, some offering prayers, others watching in stunned silence. The turbulence eased, but the tension remained thick in the air. Just as the plane began its descent for the emergency landing, the man's condition took a sudden turn. His pulse faltered, and Amara knew she had seconds to act. Ignoring the weight of the moment, she doubled down, her hands steady but her mind racing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the man took a weak, shuddering breath. A murmur of relief spread through the cabin as the plane touched down. But the twist came as paramedics rushed him off the plane. One of the man's companions, who had sneered at her earlier, approached Amara with tears in his eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," he stammered, his voice trembling. "You saved his life. We were wrong about you." Amara simply nodded, exhaustion written all over her face. As she gathered her things, ready to leave, she turned back for a moment. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "kindness is the best response to hate." With that, she walked away, leaving the group in stunned silence, forever changed by her courage and grace. As Amara stepped off the plane, the cool air of the runway hit her face, a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere she'd just left behind. She felt a wave of exhaustion, but also a quiet sense of pride. She hadn't just saved a life, she had shown what it meant to rise above hate. Inside the terminal, a few passengers from the flight caught up to her, thanking her for what she'd done. Some even apologized for not speaking up earlier. Amara accepted their words with a small smile, though she didn't linger. She had no interest in reliving the pain of the past few hours. As she walked away, she reflected on the unexpected journey. Hate could be loud, cruel, and unjust, but she had proven that compassion was stronger. In the end, she didn't just help save a life, she reminded everyone, including herself, of the power of grace.